Chapter 15, How Wells' Outline Was Sold. And now we come to the biggest thing ever put across by the Review of Reviews, the sale of 111 H.G. Wells' Outline of History. When it was offered to us, the bookstore sale of the two-volume set at $10.50 had already reached 50,000 sets. But it had begun to wane a little, so Macmillan was about to bring out a one-volume edition at $5. At the time they did so, they offered us the chance to sell it in combination with a review subscription. But to do so, we had to agree to sell 83,000 sets within 2 years and pay $25,000 advance royalties to bind the bargain. Selling 83,000 of anything in 2 years is quite an undertaking, even for the Review of Reviews, especially when the royalty must be paid whether you succeed with the sale or not. So there was some hesitation about accepting the proposition. Fred Stone and I were strongly for it, and Mr. Lanier was inclined that way himself, so it was finally decided to accept, provided we could first have 60 days in which to test for ourselves the possibility of the sale. This Macmillan agreed to, so we went to work. At the very beginning, there was quite a divergence of opinion as to how Wells could best be sold. The newspapers had reviewed the history far and wide, and their comments in general were so complimentary that it was felt by some that this was one case where no special effort need be made to sell. All we had to do was to remind people of everything the newspapers and magazines had been saying about Wells, then tell them that here was their chance to get this marvelous history, of which 50,000 had been sold at $10.50 for a third of that price. Moes who felt that way were so sure of their position that a letter and circular were written along these lines, and some 10,000 of them were tested. Here they are. What? H.G. Wells's Outline of History at one-third of the original price. Dear Sir, suppose a vote were taken of all English-speaking people as to what book of this entire generation is at once the most fascinating reading, the most useful to the reader, and the most important to mankind at large. That H.G. Wells's Outline of History would not only head the list but have more than twice as many votes as its nearest competitor is almost too easy a prophecy. We wouldn't take up your time to say such an obvious thing except for the following fact that interests you personally. Mr. Wells's big ambition for this epic-making work is that it should go to the million readers who would revel in it and get a new conception of their human race and their job in the universe, as well as to the 100,000 who can afford to pay $10.50 for such a book and who have done so. Why this offer can be made. To this end, to enable us to offer the new edition just out, revised by him, to Review of Reviews subscribers only for a really low price, and payable in small installments at that, Mr. Wells has agreed to take, on this edition only, just 1/7 of the royalty paid on the former two-volume edition. That this is the most important book distribution this magazine, or any other, has ever made, shows on its face. We confidently expect to be overwhelmed with orders that will sweep off the entire edition we have contracted for. We have, therefore, to maintain the balanced proportions of our subscription list, assigned so many copies to each state, and the order form enclosed herewith is for you, is numbered, is not transferable, and is not good after 10 days from its receipt, unless there are copies of Mr. Wells' masterpiece not yet applied for. The Common Adventure of All Mankind. Wells' history, starting with the empty dawn of things, tells you in an absorbing story the common adventure of all mankind, the growth not only of peoples but of all nature and life. Perhaps you do not realize that with all the colossal scope of the Wells history you are brought closer, face to face with the great characters of history than you or anyone else ever came before. Alexander the Great, Caesar, Cleopatra, Mahomet, Charlemagne. Napoleon becomes real persons, introduced by Wells, and if you do not get some of the heartiest laughs of your life in meeting them face to face, we miss our guess. Review of Reviews begins where Wells leaves off. The Review of Reviews, for a quarter century the most widely read monthly of current events in the world, takes up for you where the Wells history leaves off and pictures your own, and world history for you, monthly, for the rest of your life. It gives you the things you want to know about the world today. It takes from all the great newspapers and magazines everything worthwhile, and repeats the gist of it to you. It ties together the important happenings, puts them in their proper sequence, shows you their relation one to another so clearly, so interestingly, that you wonder how anyone can think himself well-informed who sees only the fragmentary reports in the daily news. No money, no risk, but hurry. Read the enclosed circular to understand why this is the most talked of and most praised work of our generation. But most important, sign your name to the enclosed card. That is all. The signed card makes sure you benefit by this Review of Reviews edition and Mr. Wells's scaling down of his royalty to 1/7 of its former size. It makes sure the great 1,200-page book, full of maps and illustrations sent to you, charges paid, and you have the full privilege of returning it within 5 days after its receipt, with not a cent of cost the opportunity of looking it over. There are no strings to this offer. Your order won't stand unless you want it to. But send the card now, without money. Tomorrow may be too late. Sincerely yours. The results were so disappointing that if our second test had not been all printed and ready for the mail, we should have abandoned the idea of selling Wells then and there. Luckily, Fred Stone and I had contended from the beginning that Wells's appeal was due primarily to the prehistoric features his history brought out, so the circular ought to be devoted largely to these. And while the first test was being rushed out, I was working on a circular along prehistoric lines. Copy of the first page of it, and the letter and card that went with it, follow. At last, H.G. Wells' Outline of History at 1/3 the original price. Dear Sir, the enclosed 10-day option is worth real money, so we have limited it to your own personal use. It is not transferable, and it is good for only 10 days after you receive this letter. If you can't use it, we should appreciate your kindness in destroying it, for it gives to a selected list of people the opportunity to get the most talked about, the most successful, and the greatest book of this generation, at a reduction of 2/3 from the original price. Think of it a discount of 67% from the price that 50,000 people have already paid. Do you wonder that we regard these options as valuable? Here is the way of it. You know, of course, that H.G. Wells's Outline of History is the most talked about book in the world today. No matter where you go, no matter what you do, you come across it. Newspapers and magazines the country over are almost a unit in commending it. Literary critics are exhausting their superlatives in trying to adequately describe it. People everywhere, just regular folks like you and me, are reading it eagerly, avidly, and getting as real enjoyment out of it as though it were the most thrilling of popular novels. And all because it gives us just those things we all want to know about peoples and countries and rulers, put in such an interesting way and with such pungent, incisive comment and occasional flashes of relieving humor that, as the New York Tribune puts it, it is among the most exciting books ever written. 50,000 copies of Wells' Outline of History have been sold in the bookstores at $10.50. 50,000 more could probably be sold at the same figure. But H.G. Wells wants to reach all the thinking people of this country, and to give us a chance to do that with one big edition, he has agreed to sacrifice 85% of his royalties on that one edition. An offer we can never make again. The result is such an offer as we can make, but once in a lifetime. H.G. Wells. Marvelous history, known and discussed wherever books are read, bound up into a single magnificent volume, fully illustrated at a price of $3.50, and a year's subscription to the Review of Reviews at its regular price of $4. Both together for $7.50 payable in little, never missed monthly payments of 50 cents or $6.50 in cash. Wells' history, starting with the empty dawn of things, tells you an absorbing story, the common adventure of all mankind, the growth not only of peoples, but of all nature and life. The Review of Reviews gives you the things you want to know about the world today. It takes from all the great newspapers and magazines everything worthwhile, and repeats the gist of it to you. It ties together the important happenings, puts them in their proper sequence, shows you their relation one to another so clearly, so interestingly, that you wonder how anyone can think himself well-informed who sees only the fragmentary reports in the daily news. There is just one condition. Only one condition we make, that you send in your reservation at once. The plates are all made, the paper is bought, the printers are waiting, but we can make only one edition at this price, and we want to give every one of our friends a chance at that edition. So we send you this offer now. Mail the enclosed card without money, and we will send you Wells' outline of history at the special price, subject to a week's free examination, and enter your subscription for 1 year of the review of reviews. If for any reason you are dissatisfied with the history, you can return it at the end of the week, send $250 for the copy of the magazine delivered you, and cancel your order. There are no strings to this offer. Your order won't stand unless you want it to. But send the card now, without money. Tomorrow may be too late. Sincerely yours. From the first day that the orders began to come in from that circular, there was never a moment's doubt as to whether we were going to sell Wells' history. Why, on ordinary occupational lists like doctors, lawyers, and the like, it pulled 3.5%. And as for the good book lists, if we told you some of the percentages that Circular chalked up, you would not believe us. Suffice it is to say that where we had hesitated about agreeing to sell 83,000 sets in 2 years, we sold 90,000 in 4 months. And the above letter and Circular did every bit of it. True, we tried some magazine and newspaper advertising, but 2 of the best advertising agencies in the country were unable to develop a single ad that pulled orders at anywhere near the low price we got them by mail. It was only when we took the different pages of the circular, like the one starting, "The Oldest Man in the World," and made page ads from them, that the advertising began to show results. But before that happened, we had sold our 90,000 sets by mail. Each of those sales carried with it a subscription to the review of reviews, $3.50 for Wells, $4 for the review, which means that at 3.5%, each circular was costing us 2 cents and a half in the mail and bringing us 26 cents worth of orders, a selling cost of less than 10%. There was money in that. But to add 90,000 subscribers to a magazine's subscription list in 4 months' time is as much as an ordinary magazine can stand, unless it wants to raise its advertising rates, and this the review did not feel like doing. So it was decided to bind the next edition of Wells in a fine art craft and sell it alone. This we did and sold another 60,000 sets before the year was out. What next? Many people would have been satisfied with that, but after the way we had been able to sell $1 million worth of O. Henry stories 2 years in succession, we were not going to give up Wells without getting a lot more out of it than a single year's sale. But we had to change our offer. We had been over all our regular lists twice with different letters and circulars. Now we must get not only a different letter, but a new reason for buying. It happened that Wells had stirred up so much comment and had received so many criticisms and suggestions that he had considerably revised the history and added a large number of new pages. So we decided to bring out the new edition in 4 volumes and price them at $9 if bought alone, or $12 with a year's subscription to the review of reviews. Then came the question of how to sell them. The circular was easy, for Tutankhamun was then very much in the public eye. So, as there was not much in Wells about him, we based the circular upon his great father-in-law, Akhenaten. But the important thing was the letter. We had already worn out the bargain appeal and the special reservation and all the usual mail order stunts. We had to find something of interest in itself, yet closely tied up with the history. After several tries, we found it. Here it is. Judge for yourself if it would not have intrigued your interest. Certainly it intrigued that of our readers, for it sold about $750,000 worth of Wells in the review. Dear reader, what is the unpardonable sin in all nature? What one thing most inevitably brings its own punishment? What most surely spells extinction? Stagnation, like standing still. The Gigantosaurus that was over 100 feet long and as big as a house? The Tyrannosaurus that had the strength of a locomotive and was the last word in frightfulness? The pterodactyl or flying dragon? All the giant monsters of prehistoric ages are gone. They did not know how to meet the changing conditions. They stood still while the life around them passed them by. Egypt and Persia, Greece and Rome, all the great empires of antiquity, perished when they ceased to grow. China built a wall about herself and stood still for 1,000 years. Today she is the football of the powers. In all nature, to cease to grow is to perish. 100 million years in one. It was for men and women who are not ready to stand still, who refuse to cease to grow, that Wells set to work on his almost incredible task. to put into one fascinating work all the 100 million years of life and growth that this planet has known. To place in your hands the orderly knowledge that men go to college 4 years to get, and often come away without. Not only the history of the world, but the science of the world, the philosophy of the world, the outstanding literature of the world, a vast panorama unrolled before your eyes by the most graphic word painter of modern times. And also, interestingly, so absorbingly done that, as the New York Tribune puts it, it is among the most exciting books ever written. That is what you get in H.G. Wells' Outline of History. And that isn't all. Just glance over the enclosed folder and think for one moment of the absorbing, fascinating story that goes with it. Education in the highest sense, entertainment in the most educational sense. People who have read this new 4-volume, finely revised edition of the Outline are saying that it has done more for them than a college education. A college education costs you probably $5,000 in 4 years of your life. Wells' wonderful work is sent to you on approval, and you will read the 4 books as absorbedly, as quickly as so many novels. 4 volumes for 1/3 less than the price of the first 2. Although the history has been revised and enlarged, although it was printed from brand new plates, with 100 new full-page pictures in addition to the 200 in the discarded edition. And although it is now bound in 4 usable library-size volumes instead of the original bulky ones, we can, through a fortunate arrangement with the Review of Reviews, send to you and a few other New Process Company customers this famous Outline of History for 33.3% less than the original 2-volume edition would cost you even now in any bookstore. What is more, you can see it, examine it, pore over it in your own home for a week at our expense. Your name on the enclosed card brings the 4 volumes to you, post-paid, for a full week's free examination. And the Review of Reviews, too. What the Outline is to past history, the Review of Reviews is to current events. It interprets men and movements in terms that every alert American can understand and profit by. It gives you the boiled-down sap of world events, equips you with a background of fact against which to read your daily news. While this one edition lasts, the low price we are offering on this great history is possible only because the Review of Reviews contracted for 100,000 sets at once. Perhaps you think that leaves plenty of time for you to get your copy. With any ordinary book that would be so, but not with Wells. They sold 90,000 copies of his 1-volume edition in little over 3 months, and already 9/10 of their 100,000 4-volume sets are gone. The remainder won't last long. At most, we can get only a few thousand sets to offer among our 258,000 New Process Company customers. Can you imagine how long those few thousand will last? Will you look over this set now, while you can get the 4 volumes revised and beautifully illustrated, at 1/3 less than the original 2-volume set would cost you even now in the bookstores? While you can have them sent to you post-paid without expense for a week's free examination to be returned collect if for any reason you decide not to keep them. The enclosed card is your answer. Use it while there is yet time. Yours till then. That ended the 2nd year of the Wells sale, but it was far from ending the sale itself. For 3 years we sold it, until our total sales topped the 360,000 mark. 2 of the letters we did it with are quoted in an earlier chapter of the book. The last of the really successful ones is given below. Last chance at 25% off, dear reader. One of those discoveries which makes history such startling and interesting reading has just come to light through the deciphering of a stone tablet found on the Sinai Peninsula. Scientists have often cast doubt upon the scriptural story of the finding of Moses. But this inscription tends to confirm the account just as we find it in the Bible. Written or dictated by Moses and translated by Professor Grimm of the University of Munster, it reads, "I, Manass, mountain chief and head priest of the temple, thank Pharaoh Hayakaput for having drawn me out of the Nile and helped me to attain high distinction." Taken alone, this might not be regarded as conclusive proof of the truth of the biblical record, but it is just one link of a chain that every day is growing stronger. Remember, in Samuel, how the Philistines killed Saul and hung his armor in the house of Ashtaroth? And how, in revenge for his death, King David 20 years later put the fortress of Beth-shan, where Saul's body had hung, to the torch. The Temple of Ashtaroth and the flame-scorched walls of Bethshan have just been unearthed by excavators working under the direction of the University of Pennsylvania, and the records there inscribed confirm much of the biblical story. Another archaeologist, Dr. Ditlev Nielsen, comes forward with finds in the Arabian desert, which tend to show that the Queen of Sheba was no myth. Whether she herself existed or not, there undoubtedly was such a kingdom, a rich and a vast kingdom, 2,000 years before Christ. On a tablet of clay dug up from the ruins of ancient Chaldea has been found an inscription detailing in almost identical language the scriptural account of the flood. While as for the Tower of Babel, its ruins are still standing. Discoveries like these, which are daily coming to light, go to show that there is no real conflict between religion and science. Interpretations may differ, but to the broad-minded student of science, as to the broad-minded student of the Bible, there is a common meeting ground, and nowhere is it better brought out than in H.G. Wells' Outline of History. Wells gives you the one interesting, connected story of the world. It is no mere history in the old, dull sense, not a mere account of the rise of this nation and the fall of that. It is the history of mankind. No one but Wells could make so fascinating the story of man's progress upon Earth. No one else could give so vivid a synopsis of all that is worth knowing in history. Just glance over the enclosed folder and think for one moment of the absorbing, fascinating story that goes with it. Education in the highest sense. Entertainment in the most educational sense. People who have read this new 4-volume, finally revised edition of The Outline are saying that it has done more for them than a college education. A college education costs you probably $5,000 in 4 years of your life. Wells' wonderful work is sent to you on approval, and you will read the 4 books as absorbedly, as quickly as so many novels. 4 volumes for 25% less than the price of the first 2. Although the history has been revised and enlarged, although it was jointed from brand new plates with 100 new full-page pictures in addition to the 200 in the discarded edition, and although it is now bound in 4 usable, library-size volumes instead of the original bulky ones, we can, while the edition lasts, send to you and a few others this famous Outline of History for 25% less than the original 2-volume edition would cost you even now in any bookstore. What is more, you can see it, examine it, pore over it in your own home for a week at our expense. Your name on the enclosed card brings the 4 volumes to you post-paid for a full week's free examination, and the review of reviews, too. What the outline is to past history, the review of reviews is to current events. It interprets men and movements in terms that every alert American can understand and profit by. It gives you the boiled-down sap of world events, equips you with a background of facts against which to read your daily news. While this one edition lasts, the low price we have been making on Wells' Outline of History was made possible only because we contracted for 100,000 sets at once. Of all those 100,000 sets, only a few are now left. We can't hope to ever bring out an edition like that again. We can't expect to ever be able to manufacture and sell on so small a margin. When the few remaining sets are gone, your last chance at those low-cost volumes will go with them. So don't file this away to think over. There's nothing to puzzle about because you don't have to send 1 penny or promise anything. Other than that, if you don't find these 4 volumes, as the New York Evening Post puts it, one of the indispensable books, why, just send them back and that ends the matter. That's easy, isn't it? I'll be holding 1 set for you for a few days, but you'll have to mail the enclosed card right away. Yours till then. P.S. If you are already a subscriber for the Review of Reviews, or if you prefer a fiction magazine, you may substitute the new Golden Book for 18 months instead of the Review of Reviews 1 year for the sale price. Simply change the order card. The Golden Book is the new kind of story magazine that everyone is talking about. The best stories, essays, plays, and poems of all time, selected by a board of editors as worthy to endure out of all the world's great literature. That ended the biggest sale of any one set of books that the review ever had. We have always been especially proud of it, for we worked it up from scratch. There was nothing in any previous campaign to give us an indication of what appeal would go best on it. And as it happened, our most effective appeals were entirely different from anything we had ever tried before. Of course, it really followed the rules outlined in the early chapters of this book, for with the discovery of the tomb of Tutankhamun, the people's interest was centered largely on things prehistoric. So, when we started our circular or letter with a reference to something of the kind, we were tying right in with that interest. This was well illustrated by the last two letters, the one referring to the prehistoric fossils and dinosaur eggs, and the other to the unearthing of the stone tablet of Moses. Even after 250,000 sets had been sold, those two letters were still able to stir up interest and add another 100,000 sales to the record. The point would seem to be that if you can tie in with what people are thinking about and interested in, you can sell anything. And the particular form that your letter takes is far less important than the chord it happens to strike. We shall touch upon this later with regard to letters selling other products. The big sale of Wells naturally brought us a lot of good publicity. To the review, that meant more advertising contracts. To me, it meant a chance to try a new field selling, not books, but wearing apparel and men's furnishings of different kinds. Some 15 years previously, John Blair of Warren, P., had started what is now the New Process Company, with $100 of borrowed capital and an idea. The idea came from having worked his way home from college by selling raincoats. It seems that one of his chums in college had just been willed a raincoat factory, and he had proposed to Blair that the latter take the job of sales manager. Blair was ever a modest soul, and he had some doubt of his fitness for the job. So he decided to see how much he knew about selling by taking a trunk full of samples and working his way from Philadelphia to his home in Warren. The trial was without special incident until he reached Kane, some 40 miles from Warren and his last stop. He was showing his samples to a merchant when a customer came into the store. The man seemed in no hurry, so the merchant went on looking over the coats and finally placed his order. Blair was putting away his samples when the customer strolled over. "Got any black raincoats in that bunch?" the man asked. Blair thought a moment and finally remembered that he had one down at the bottom of the trunk. He hauled it out, found that it fitted, and a sale was made. Curious to know what anyone could want with a black raincoat in that day of tans and grays, Blair asked him why he had picked on black. "I'm an undertaker," the other explained. "When I go to a funeral, I must wear a black coat. A dozen times I've been caught in heavy rains and just about spoiled every coat I had. Now she can rain all she wants to." That set Blair to thinking. There were 29,000 undertakers in the country, and except in the big cities, every one of them must be faced with the same problem. The big city stores might be able to stock black raincoats in enough different sizes to fit every undertaker, but certainly the small town stores could not. So it meant either wearing an ordinary coat and getting soaked by every heavy rain, or else having a coat specially made at high cost. If some one central store could cater to all these undertakers by mail, it ought to be able to do a tremendous business. Blair decided to try it. He wrote a letter embodying the idea and offered to supply black raincoats of perfect fit at the same price ordinary raincoats were selling for in stores. His printer trusted him for the letter and envelopes. His chum agreed to make up 400 black raincoats for him in assorted sizes, and he borrowed $100 for the postage. The rest of the work he and his brothers did themselves. He mailed 10,000 letters, then waited fearfully for the results. They came all right. His 400 coats melted like snow before the summer sun. A second 400 went almost as fast, and he had to order a third 400 before the orders stopped coming. For 2 years, he was content to sell raincoats to undertakers only. Then priests and ministers began to write him, and he extended his line to cover them. From that to selling ordinary coats and suits and other items of men's furnishings was but a step. In 15 years, he worked up his gross sales to about $2 million a year. Then he seemed to reach his limit. During all those 15 years, his entire sales appeal had been centered around one idea: personalizing. In the beginning, he had catered only to undertakers. His customers felt, and rightly, that here was a house devoted to their interests alone, that he understood the undertaker's needs, that they could get better service, lower prices, closer attention from him than anywhere else. And with each new occupation or profession he added to his lists, Blair was careful to use that same personalized appeal. He never sent the same letter to undertakers as to doctors or ministers. He wrote to each as one who specialized in that profession's needs. He quoted testimonials from well-known men in the same line. He won confidence by a thorough understanding of the needs of each profession and occupation, and he brought back the orders with prices and goods that really did represent unusual values. But there came a time when the old appeals began to lose their pull, when the occupational lists seemed to wear out. So he was forced to turn to general lists, such as telephone users, automobile owners, and the like. How could he make effective use of his personalized appeal on them? You would never guess the way he finally worked out. It showed ingenuity of a high order. With a gross business of $2 million, he had customers in almost every town of any size in the country. And a great many had written appreciative letters telling what good value they considered his coat, how well it was wearing, and so on. So, what did he do but pick every town from which he had one or more good testimonials and write a letter? Something like this. The best value in a raincoat I have ever had. You've saved me at least $10 on the price I'd have had to pay in our local stores. The very words of John J. Smith of 2601 Racine Avenue of your city. Perhaps you know Mr. Smith. If so, you know he is not given to exaggeration. To make such an impression upon him, a coat must be good. And to draw forth a letter like the above, it needs to be a most unusual value. If it is all of that, the caliber of men who are wearing it is sufficient guarantee. When men like James Brown of 314 Hardin Avo, William Sherman of 14 6th Saint, and Max Jones of 14 5th Avenue will send all the way out here for a raincoat, there must be something about the coat and the price of it that it would be worth your while to know. And so on into a description of the coat. That was expensive circularizing, of course, requiring a different letter for each town, but it proved to be so effective that it seemed well worth the extra expense. 1 year before I went up there, this form of letter pulled so well that John Blair felt safe in contracting for some 20,000 raincoats for spring delivery and 40,000 traveling bags for summer sale. But along about that time, retailers were beginning to awaken to the so-called menace of mail order competition. Letters like the one above, intimating that the mail order people could offer far better values than those given in stores, got under their skin, and they centered their efforts upon the men whose names were quoted in them to such good purpose that permission to use them was withdrawn. By the time he started getting his letters ready for the spring sale, Blair found himself with so few testimonials and names he could use that instead of personalizing by towns and cities, he was forced to try it by states, and the results proved most disappointing. Where he needed nearly 1.5% of orders to show a profit, he got less than 0.5%. Where he had expected to sell well over 20,000 raincoats, he found it difficult to dispose of 5,000. And the traveling bag season started off just as disappointingly. The result was that the 1st of June showed them, not the goodly profit of usual years, not the rush of business they had expected, but $80,000 in the red and an inventory so big that it simply staggered them. It was then I was given the chance to show what book publishing methods would do in the way of moving merchandise. I had come up long enough before to have had time to send out a couple of tests and to become familiar with the organization and the product. Now I was to have the opportunity to show whether I was worth my salt. And that is the end of Chapter 15. If you would like to grab your copy of the Robert Collier letter book, click the link in the description and you will find it available in German, Spanish, and French, alongside many other fundamental marketing books. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more direct response content. See you in the next one.